the biggest advice is that you need it. Look into it, ask a lot of questions so that you're getting the coverage that you know that you need. And you're not spending on things that maybe you don't need, but definitely start researching, start looking into it, ask the questions, and get it sooner rather than later.
And if you don't understand your contracts and understand the losses that you may incur if there was an event that caused you to cancel or postpone, if you want to roll the dice, that is totally your prerogative. Just understand what you're getting yourself into and then what potential losses that you may have. If you're okay with that and you're okay with that number, that is great. But just make sure you understand your contracts and the potential of lost deposits or lost full fees as well.
Hey guys, this is Virgil. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. In this episode, I'm going to talk to Meredith and Jacqueline with Sweetgrass Social. They are a wedding design and planning firm based here in Charleston, South Carolina. Today, we're going to talk about the hot topic of wedding insurance. Now, there's not a lot of people out there in the wedding industry in the United States that talk about wedding insurance. So I want to get the conversation started with them. So without giving you too much info in this intro, let's get to the interview.
Hey.
Hey. Good morning.
Morning. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, great.
How's it going?
Good. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing super well. Are you guys at your office?
We are. Yeah. We decided to come in today. We come in a couple days a week these days. So.
You guys had a busy day yesterday. Did you guys come into the office yesterday?
We did. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We were here most of the day and even went on some site visits. And so, trying to get back to normal somewhat.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in or joining me today and talk about a little bit about wedding insurance.
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Oh, you're welcome. I want to go ahead and get started if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So today, first, I want to thank you for your time. I'm very grateful. I know you guys are very busy and giving an hour and a half of your time is so appreciated. So thank you so much. For the people that are out there that don't know anything about you, can you tell us a little bit about who you are first and what you do and where you're based out of?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So we are Sweetgrass Social. Meredith and I co-founded this company 11 years ago, right? Okay. 11 years ago. And we are wedding planners and designers. We are based out of Charleston, like I said, but we travel all over. We do have a team with us. So we also have two other girls in our team, Smith and Maxwell, that work with us as well. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I think that covers it.
So you guys are business partners.
We are.
Yeah.
Awesome. And when did you guys start your business again?
2009.
So you guys have been around a while.
Yeah.
Have seen a lot, and you've seen and experienced a lot of different circumstances in the wedding field.
Yes.
Definitely.
A lot of crazy scenarios. So.
What are the I call those circumstance badges that you wear, like hurricane, tornado? What are the things you've experienced in your years of being in the wedding?
Well, let's see. We have been through floods and had to try and navigate weddings. Jacqueline and I were actually split the day of the year, 1,000-year flood, like we all like to refer to it here in Charleston. Jacqueline was out at Kiowa and I was in downtown. And then hurricanes, we've been through plenty of evacuations. We have been through some emergency situations on the wedding days where we've had guests that we had a grandparent have a stroke right before the ceremony. We've had someone that has been injured and fallen due to the heat before. We've had some rather rowdy drunk guests that have decided to run into the ocean at one point. Lots of crazy things over the years, but all things that we were able to navigate and work through and make sure that our clients were taken care of during it. So,
have you been in a pandemic before at weddings?
Nope.
After 2020, we're going to be carrying a lot of badges, I think.
A lot. I mean, you said tornado, hurricane, flood, fire?
Well, do you remember at the Hibernian, that one?
Oh, yes.
This was Jacqueline went into, I will never forget this. We were doing a wedding together at the Hibernian, and on one of the bars, it was in a hurricane glass, but a candle, it somehow caught with one of the leaves or something, and it just started flames kind of coming up. And I grabbed Jacqueline's arm, and then she just ran across the room. It was fine. It was contained and everything. We were like, oh my gosh, if we burned down a venue, that would be such a nightmare. So anyway, lesson learned on that. Be careful what is too close. I mean, we've certainly had some times where flowers have been singed. So we go through every table now. That just comes with experience, and check to make sure that photos are not too close, that flare candles are not too close, because you don't want anything that is going to catch a floral arrangement on fire.
As a photographer, I think I've seen a lot of that. I know exactly what you're talking about. Like candles almost touching the leaf, and then, I was like, man, that could be a disaster right there. What about earthquake? You guys been in an earthquake before? We're sitting on the fault line here in Somerville, I think, or Charleston area.
Yeah, if we have, it hasn't affected.
It hasn't affected. Okay.
Don't put that evil on us this year.
Knock on wood.
I mean, if it's gonna happen, it'll be this year. But
Yeah.
Please.
It'll be 2020, right? I mean, it's crazy this year. Well, thank you guys again for being here. I wanted to specifically talk today about wedding insurance. And there's not a lot of people talking about wedding insurance right now around the country. And I think it's a conversation that needs to be started, because I think a lot of brides out there and their parents and their families need to consider it. And I'm sure you agree. It just helps a lot. I think it gives a lot of, having wedding insurance gives a lot of peace to everyone involved. So I want to talk to you a little bit about it, because I know you guys are pretty knowledgeable about it. But first, before we start, I want to say that this is not a professional advice. This is an opinion piece. It's an opinion podcast, and you guys are not insurance brokers. I'm not an insurance broker. This is not a sponsored podcast about selling you insurance. That we're not affiliated with any insurance company. We're going to talk about one specific insurance company that we know of, and I'm sure you guys are going to recommend a lot of other insurance out there. So I would suggest for people out there that are listening and watching, that please do your due diligence. This opinion piece is just for you to kind of get started on thinking about this, and please do your due diligence and research what's best for you, your wedding, and your family. So now that I got that out of the way, let's get started with asking you guys with some questions. So first, I have my notes here and I have a screen here. So just in case I'm not looking at the camera, what is a wedding insurance? People don't know about wedding insurance exist, and why do people get it?
Well, wedding insurance was something that kind of came on the market in the 90s, and people thought it was a little bit weird. They were very specialized policies, so it's not something that's been around forever. And really, I don't think it started to gain traction and really get a lot of people on board with purchasing policies to probably, I would say, like the 2000s, right? So Jacqueline and I, for probably the last 5-6 years, we've included that in our contract, that we require that our clients purchase a wedding policy. If they opt not to, then we ask them to sign a waiver. So with insurance policies, it's twofold. So there may be a venue, for example.
Wait, hang on. Hold that thought real quick. What you said, if they don't get insurance policy, you ask them to sign a waiver. What is in that waiver?
So that is waiving Sweetgrass Social of any liability. So in the event that there was an incident that happened on site, and we carry an insurance policy too, of course, but if there was an incident where there would be any sort of litigation that would happen due to something that happened at the event, like a guest were to drive off property and let's say get a DUI or something like that, that they would not hold Sweetgrass Social liable for that.
Got it.
And there's a lot of things that are covered in a policy. So there's two main policies. There's a liability policy and then there's a cancellation policy.
Got it.
Liability policies have been your most standard run-of-the-mill policies that have been around for a while. So that is going to be covering liability for there may be a venue that would require that in a contract. One I can think of off the top of my head is the old Exchange building. They've required that for many years. And it's been a while since I've done an event there. I'm sure that they probably still have that, but they ask a client to take out a liability policy with a certain amount of coverage. Usually I think it's $1 million or $2 million limitation on it, and name the old Exchange building as an additional insured. So what that does for them is they carry an insurance policy, but if there was any sort of lawsuit or anything where a guest was gonna sue the client because of something that had happened at that event, that policy would come into play. So it's covering you for any medical event, or I'm trying to think of some other scenarios.
So the venue, the old Exchange, is telling the bride, hey, if you want to get married here, you need to get a policy, a liability policy for your guests in case somebody falls off the steps.
Yes,
not going
or
to be liable.
damage to the venue, anything like that. So that policy, while old Exchange, their policy would kick in, the client's policy is going to kick in first because
Got it.
we're going to have that coverage.
This is an additional safety kind of protection insurance.
Absolutely. And when you're dealing with these historical properties, there are so many pieces that are irreplaceable. I mean, let's think about the wood floors that are several hundred years old and things that are not going to be normal to be able to come in with a replacement.
Yeah.
Why they have to carry these higher insurance policies.
Got it. So just for the people listening out there right now, it's June 10th, 2020. So this information may or may not be, when we launch this podcast, may or may not apply. So please do your due diligence and ask your venue or old Exchange specifically, because we talked about it. We were talking about it. What's the current policy right now?
Yeah, and again, I have not done an event at the old Exchange in probably 5 years now. I know that was in their contract. It used to be, and it's going to be something that's kind of standard throughout the country. You may see that in some venues contracts. We don't see it all the time here in Charleston, but if you see that, just know that's normal. And those policies are fairly affordable. Some on the market, may even start as low as $75, a couple $100. When you get cancellation insurance policy, that's a separate policy. And those are the policies that have been really instrumental and key for people that have been experiencing setbacks due to COVID-19.
Yeah.
Now, I can't categorically say too that every insurance company has covered every claim. I know that they are taking it as it comes. However, from our experience, from our clients that had pre-existing cancellation policies that were in place prior to March and prior to the known existence of COVID-19 being named a pandemic here in the US, those clients have been able to receive coverage. Also, clients have been able to receive coverage if at the time of their event was not able to take place due to a government mandate. So I was speaking with one of our brides yesterday who had been with Markel Insurance. She was saying that they never mentioned COVID-19 when submitting their claims, but because the venue was not able to host it because the venue was closed, they ended up canceling because they don't know when they can reschedule, just due to some family medical issues. So they were able to recoup all of their costs, everything that they had put down up to that point. So that's why those policies are so important. Now, if you were to go today to purchase one, you're not going to be covered by COVID-19 issues. So bear that in mind. There are only a couple places that are issuing them. But if you had a policy in place prior to March, then you have a good shot. So
That makes sense. It's funny. I had a client for this coming August, and they're out of state, and I mentioned wedding insurance, and the planner actually didn't really mention or talk to them about it, and the mother of the bride was like, "Oh wow, I didn't even know there was such thing as wedding insurance." I said, "Yeah," and I emailed her a couple of options. Like, I don't really know anything about it. I know I've heard people are able to get wedding insurance. So I emailed her some resources, and she's like, "Thank you so much. I'm going to definitely do some research, because their wedding is not, it's a pretty big wedding. It's probably a 6-figure wedding budget. So I'm not really sure how much, but I know they would really benefit from it because of hurricane season and everything else that might happen, you know?" So with that being said, our brides, their families, their mother of the bride, are they required to get wedding insurance in Charleston or anywhere around the United States?
It depends. They are not. Some venues, like we said before, are requiring it, and then we require that, like we said before. However, if you don't do it, you just have to sign the waiver. So it varies place by place on what it is. It'll be included in your contract if you are required to. Or if they do like we do and offer you a waiver if you decide not to do that. So just kind of varies.
If you're here in Charleston, do you know of any venues that require it?
There are venues that require the liability policies,
right?
But I don't know of any venues that would require the cancellation policy. The cancellation policy is really primarily in protection of the bride and the groom. The liability policy, it somewhat protects the venue, but I mean, it more so is going to protect any lost deposits, any damages that happen to the client if they have to make any changes to their event. So
yeah. How much should brides and their family should budget for a wedding insurance?
So on the low end, if you're just doing liability insurance, then like I said, I think you can expect any couple $100, I would say at least. But if you do cancellation as well and your wedding exceeds $100,000, then you can expect in the range of $700, $750. I haven't seen any policies exceed $1,000 that I can think of in the last few years. Most of them have fallen in, I would say, the $500 to $750 range. I did a quote yesterday and it came out to be around $750. That was a cancellation policy and it was for this year. It did give the disclaimer that it doesn't cover any COVID-19 events. However, it would cover us in the event of a hurricane because that is not a known circumstance. Right. So if you think about purchasing wedding insurance right now, think about it if you were trying to purchase wedding insurance in the middle of a hurricane. If there was a hurricane happening tomorrow, we knew Charleston was in the direct path, and I went on and tried to get wedding insurance. Well, they're not going to cover me because we know that Charleston was in the direct path. So we know that COVID-19 is out there and is spreading. So it's the same concept. You can't just go on and buy a cancellation policy because you know, hey, my wedding was rescheduled for next month and it may or may not be canceled. So I'm gonna buy a cancellation policy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So when do you suggest they should buy a wedding insurance? Like after they secured all of their vendors, or the beginning when they first get engaged, or when?
In the beginning, yeah. I mean, we encourage that in the beginning, and I know some people, decide to wait a little bit, but I mean, we encourage you to in the beginning because it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to hurt you. If anything, it's only going to protect you.
Yeah.
So the beginning, after they hired a wedding planner like yourself, go ahead and put that on your top 5 list to do.
Yeah. And another thing, and again, I would call to reconfirm this. From what I was told most recently, and this was as early as this week, I was talking to an agent with Wedshore, and we were just kind of discussing what things would or wouldn't be covered for a particular client. And something that they've rolled out with, now I don't think this is how it used to be, but again, I may be wrong on this, but they are one of the only carriers that carries change of heart insurance. So what that means is if let's say a parent was paying for a wedding on behalf of their child, they could take out a policy on that event because they are the host of the event and the event is in honor of someone else. If the honoree had a change of heart, the parents could then be reimbursed for that money because the honoree had a change of heart. However, what's different about it now is if you add change of heart to your policy, not only does it increase your premium, but now they're saying you have to purchase that 15 months in advance.
Wow.
Which used to be the case. So
change of heart is basically when the bride says, I don't want to marry you anymore. Even though we paid all these deposits. So that insurance will cover that. Change of heart also, who's engaged for more than 15 months? On average, people are engaged 9 months, 12 months, right? So that's tough.
COVID-19 clients will be.
Yeah.
If you think about the people that are getting engaged in quarantine and what dates are left available, they're looking at a 16, 15 month timeline.
Yeah. I just talked with someone yesterday that she's 18 months out.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's probably something that, this is funny. The mother probably wouldn't want to get it out there as far as information. Maybe it's something they can secretly get, behind the scenes, maybe, right?
Yeah. They may not disclose it. But it's a protection. Yeah. For financial protection for the parents. So.
Oh yeah, 100%. I completely agree because a lot of the weddings that we do here in Charleston, they're not cheap. If you're having, at the same time, the cost that you mentioned between $500 to $1,000 for insurance policy that will cover $80,000, $100,000, $150,000 of wedding budget. I think that's almost a no-brainer, right?
I agree. In the scheme of things, that is a very small percentage of what it is that you're going to be paying for a Charleston wedding. So to have that protection, I think, is invaluable.
For the people that are having a $30,000, $40,000 wedding, that could even drive the cost down of these insurance premiums, like probably a couple $100.
It could. Yeah. And, as far as the cancellation policies available for events that are in the $30,000 to $40,000 range, I would check with the carriers. I know we mentioned Wedshore. Travelers has, I believe, opened back up to some cancellation policies, but I believe it's for only events that are $100,000 or more.
Notes that we had from yesterday. So Markel was not doing new event cancellation policies. Event liability policies can still be purchased. Travelers, yes, is still issuing event cancellation. WedSafe is unable to offer event cancellation policies right now, and Wedshore is offering event cancellation policies.
Perfect. How do you, and this is going to be on the show notes and info link below, but how do you spell Markel if they were looking for it?
Markel.
Okay.
And I always pronounced it Markle until I called and spoke with an agent and they said, "Hello, thank you for calling Markel." And I was like, "Oh, I've been saying your name wrong all along. I thought it was like Meghan Markle." And they were like, "We get it all the time."
So this Markle is based here in the United States, and they cover pretty much any weddings in the United States, correct?
They were. So from one of the clients I was speaking about earlier that I was talking to yesterday that was funded by Markel for their wedding that was supposed to happen this past March, right now they are not issuing new wedding policies, and I don't know if they're going to come back. So I don't know that they're going to be a resource moving forward for wedding insurance. I think that some of their funds may have been exhausted. I don't know that for a fact, but that is
Again,
from the information from the other. She was funded though.
Yeah.
She was funded, so.
again, just if you're listening out there and you're a bride and you're planning your wedding, do your due diligence.
And this
Research Markel, call them up.
changes day by day, I mean, as we continue through COVID-19 and learn new things about the disease, and as things continue to open back up, maybe we'll see some changes. And honestly too, it's not to say that if you purchased a policy now and maybe a new strand of the virus came out that was not COVID-19, maybe then it would be good. I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but there could be all these scenarios where we open back up and it was able to happen. Well, then they close last minute because there's a resurgence. Well, then maybe it'd be covered because it was open and then closed back. Yeah. These are all one-offs, and basically what the insurance agent was telling me yesterday that I was speaking to was saying at this point, because there are so many unknowns, we can't say in the future, yes, this would be covered, or no, it wouldn't be covered until we know how it evolves and know if there are additional closures or, a different strand of it. It's just like not knowing definitively that we're going to have a hurricane this year or an earthquake like Virgil has called for.
Right. Jacqueline, who are the other insurance companies? Travelers?
So there's Travelers, WedSafe, WedSure, and Markel.
And I want to say that WedSafe goes to the Wedding Protector Plan. I want to say they're owned by Nationwide. And one of them is. I believe it is WedSafe. Again, I'm not a broker, y'all. Please know that I am not an insurance broker, but I'm pretty positive that they are. And I know that site has not been active. It did used
Which
to
one?
WedSafe. WedSafe is
WedSafe, but then it goes to, you click through and then it goes to a site. This is the Wedding Protector Plan is the name of the plan. And whichever that is, I believe is owned by Nationwide Insurance.
So what about, can they approach their own insurance companies like State Farm, Allstate? Are they offering anything?
Yeah, I don't know if they're currently offering anything. That is something that in the past, some clients have been able to do, to add an addendum onto like their home insurance or something like that, to add event insurance. I don't think we have any current clients that have that scenario, so not as knowledgeable about what they are doing right now with those types of policies. But it has been an option. So we always do say, talk to your insurance agent and see if they're able to offer you anything through your insurance or an addendum onto that.
Well, and most of the time that's going to be an umbrella policy. So that's going to be something where, like, for example, if you had your homeowner's insurance with State Farm and you had an umbrella policy and you extended that upon your event, because let's say you were hosting the rehearsal dinner or the reception on your property, that's going to be more liability insurance. So like we were talking about earlier, if you're hosting an event at your home or at your own personal property, it's a good idea to get that specific event liability policy, because if somebody drives off of your property and then is injured or is injured on your property, that would normally go against your homeowner's insurance, but it's going to instead then go against this event policy. But if you extend the policy, the umbrella policy, upon the event, which again, they may or may not be doing that right now, but if you did, then that's going to cover you if someone was hurt or if there were any expenses due to an event that happened, or an instance that happened during an event.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and just to go off of that too, I know a lot of people are doing maybe smaller events at their home, and maybe they're thinking, well, it's smaller and I don't need an event and policy or liability. I still would recommend it. Even though it's small, accidents can still happen. So I would say even for those people that are doing smaller events at their home instead, to still do something like that.
Well, let's think about this scenario. So, and this is a, kind of just a random story, but if you are having a wedding reception at your home and everyone's standing on the back porch is elevated. Maybe you've lived in this home for so many years, so you haven't had your house inspected since you purchased it probably, or you didn't know that there was any sort of rot. But once there's all of these people standing on it, that's a substantial amount of weight that is now on the back porch, and the boards break or it collapses. Okay. So that was due to the fact that you were hosting this event there and that there were 100 people standing in your back porch. So that's where that liability policy would kick in, because all of those people that have just fallen, that have on a collapsed porch, have all these injuries, medical expenses and whatnot. Those things, if they could turn around and sue you, are going to be covered by that policy. That is why it is essential for you to have that, because you have no idea. Or let's say somebody's walking on your property and you have a large field in your backyard, and there is a hole that they step in and they break their ankle. They then in turn sue you because on your property you didn't take care and fill those holes. I mean, same thing there. You just want to be covered for the what ifs.
Yeah, I've had a wedding before, or weddings actually, that they put plexiglass on top of a swimming pool and made it a dance floor or a dinner area.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if that thing collapses and people get hurt and they go in the swimming pool, I mean, that's something that they will have a peace of mind that they'll be covered, right? In case somebody had a medical issue or had to go to the hospital, had medical expenses, correct?
Right.
Correct.
So that kind of answered my question, like, why is it even necessary? I think, but Cliff Notes version, why do you think these people need to have wedding insurance? To basically cover for the what ifs and what happens if somebody gets hurt, they're covered. It's an extra protection to their assets. I mean, because people are going to their homes, if they're having an event at their home, a wedding, and you have 150, 200 people, I mean, half the time the family probably doesn't know, like there's always that plus one guest, what if they get hurt? Like, you never know. It's always smart to have some kind of protection to protect your assets. So that's a good thing. For a small fee, that'll give them a lot of peace of mind as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. And then also just going into the what ifs, like what if there's a hurricane? What if, things like that, things that we can't predict.
Yeah. So speaking of that, Jacqueline, June 1st was hurricane season, the start of hurricane season. It ends end of November. So right now we are on June 9th or June 10th. A lot of people are having weddings in July. Is it okay? If they don't have the wedding insurance right now, should they go ahead and get insurance? Will they be covered for hurricane, or is it too late?
As far as I know, they can still get insurance right now to cover those types of things. I don't think that there's anything that says when we're in hurricane season.
No, but I think there may be a limitation on how many weeks prior to an event, or whether you would get coverage. I mean, if it's not a named storm, then I think that you're okay, but I would double check the fine print on that, because let's say if you purchased it today and your wedding was at the end of July, you're probably okay. But check if there's any sort of limitation as to how many weeks or how many days prior to the event that you need to purchase that. But speaking to this fall, absolutely. Go ahead and still buy that cancellation policy, because if we do have any hurricanes come this fall, which, I mean, we very well may have some this summer. I'm not saying that we won't, but typically we usually see evacuations September, October. So definitely those clients, need to buy it.
So definitely, if you're watching this show, you're listening to this show, as soon as you finish this show, put this on your list, or call Wedsure, all these companies that we listed below. Call them, ask them. If you're getting married in July, call them immediately and ask them about coverage and see what would it take to cover and what are the coverage that fits your wedding, correct?
Right. And when you call them, I think that they are super helpful. But if you have a very specific scenario, a one-off scenario, what if next March we go into another quarantine? Or what if they're not going to be able to tell you definitively if you'd be covered or not, because it's a what if scenario. And at this point, they can't say whether or not there would be coverage because they don't know how it's going to evolve. So just know that that's going to be a standard answer, and to not be frustrated by that. But at this point, we really can't predict those things for next spring season, next fall season.
Got it. So can you walk me through really quickly on how does it work? All right. So let's say they're getting married in October. There's a hurricane that's coming to Charleston, and they have paid their deposits, their non-refundable retainers with their vendors. Let's just say with me, I'm a photographer. So let's say they paid me, say $2,000 for retainer, and then they paid the band $2,000 and catering. And how does that play out as far as, wedding insurance? What if they decide to cancel, postpone the wedding to a different date? When does insurance kick in? Take it away from there.
Postpone because of a hurricane?
Yes.
So documentation is incredibly important. So what they would need would be something from primarily the venue to say, we're not able to host this event because South Carolina has called a mandatory evacuation. So they would need documentation there and showing that and sending it then into the insurance claims. And then they would also need documentation of any receipts, any paid deposits, copies of contracts saying that those are non-refundable. All of those things would need to be submitted to the insurance company. Now, depending on the vendor's policy, whether or not they're going to be willing to move to a new date without an additional fee, or if it would accrue an additional fee, that would also need to be outlined. So let's say, Virgil, if you had a client that was getting married in September and then they decided that they were going to get married next August because we were under a mandatory evacuation, and you decided to, and I'm not saying that this is your policy, but let's say you decided to charge a $500 fee for the move of the date because it was a peak date, whatever. That would need to be documented as well, because then that would need to be submitted as an additional expense under their policy. Now you have to have that coverage in your policy. So when you're applying for the policy, you want to add in things. One of the line items that you can add in is additional expenses. So let's say the estimated cost of the wedding is $100,000. You put that in, you're given a certain premium rate. And then it says, please indicate if you'd like to have additional expenses covered. So you can choose like $15,000, $10,000. There's all different types of additional expenses you can add in there. But what that would be, that would kick in a situation like this, as long as you didn't max out the policy. So because we're moving to the new date, we're not losing the retainer, but we're being charged $500 to move the date. So I'm going to submit this to insurance so that I can be covered, because this was an additional unforeseen expense because I was forced to move.
Right. Well, here's the thing. When it comes to weddings, a lot of payments are due 60 days, 30 days, 2 weeks before the wedding itself.
Yeah.
So by the time a hurricane rolls around in our town, it'll be 3 days, 4 days, 5 days before they start saying, okay, it's going to hit Charleston. So by that time, full payments have already been made. So if I have $100,000 wedding, you're all in $100,000 even before the hurricane, even before they predict hurricanes can hit Charleston. How does that work?
Well, so again, depending on the vendors, if they're all able to move over, then great, they have been moved to the new date. If each of them individually, if someone's charged a new fee, a great example would be a florist. So if they call a mandatory evacuation, it's usually within a couple of weeks of the event. Flowers have been ordered a month prior usually. So that flower order is coming in regardless. Now, whether it would get here, probably not, but that money has been paid and that ship sailed. So that would be one of those scenarios where it'd be the cost of the flowers would be an additional expense. So if the florist then says, yes, come next year, and two, we got to bear in mind the floral market has taken a hit due to COVID-19. So flower prices could change, but they may say, okay, at your new date, at 30 days prior, I won't charge you any additional on the labor fees, but the cost of the flowers,
Right.
I would need you do that. Depending on their ordering schedule and if they've already ordered it, that's going to be a case-by-case basis. But that's one example I can think of. That's a great thing to then submit to insurance. This was unforeseen. This is an additional expense. I'd like to submit that. That was out of your control.
Man, that's almost like a no-brainer, because just like what I mentioned, by the time a hurricane hits us, if it's going to hit us, knock on wood, they're already in. They've already written all the checks. And
Yeah.
that's such a stressful situation when you have this big wedding with all these people coming. Like, what do you do? I mean, we've all been through that with the flood, 1,000-year flood here in Charleston, where everybody just kind of scrambled. Like, what do we do? It'll be such a peace of mind on their, in their hearts. It brings them peace knowing that they can, okay, let's just reschedule this wedding. It's unforeseen, but we're not going to lose our $100,000 or $80,000 or $50,000.
If they don't have an option to reschedule and they did have to cancel, they would then know they could recoup that cost, as long as they, hadn't already previously maxed out their policy, which I wouldn't think they would have had any other claims prior to that. But they should be able to recoup that cost. Like, that bride we were speaking about that I was talking to you yesterday, they had to cancel for now until they can figure out, until there's a vaccine for COVID-19. Yeah. So they'll pick back up the planning again once they know that their family can be safe at the event. But until that time, it was a cancellation. So they had paid everything in full. But they were able to recoup all of everything they paid because of the insurance.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's already stressful thinking about that if you're getting married in hurricane season and then there's an imminent threat of hurricane. And if you're a florist, there's no way you can waive the non-refundable deposit and move it over to the next date. I mean, they're going to lose out also as far as the clients on the floral costs, right? I mean, if it's a $20,000 floral invoice, I mean, they're not going to be able to say, okay, let's move it to a different date and we won't charge you because they've already ordered the flowers.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And, especially like what happened with COVID, there are so many things that could happen like that again. And, just sticking with the floral thing, I think that's such a huge piece to think about, because we know people whose event was like that weekend. So flowers were already there in the flower shop. They're not going to last till next year. So
yeah.
Those flowers have to be ordered again, and that can't be at the expense of the florist.
Right.
So
what about events like the unforeseen? And I don't want to talk about this, but it could happen. Accidents happen. What about death? Things like that. Is that something wedding insurance will cover also, as far as cancellation?
Yeah, certain ones will. Yeah, I mean, it's something you have to read the fine print. If it was the death of an immediate family member, then oftentimes it is covered, but it is outlined in the clauses. There are exceptions to it. So you'd have to read through the exceptions, and every company is going to vary on that, but usually, yes, that is something that's covered. And two, I mean, as far as, I can't speak for every vendor, but I think that, I know that's something that's written into our contract, that if it were the death of an immediate family member or someone, then obviously we're gonna work with them. That's not something that anyone can control or anyone would want.
Yeah.
So
and that also, if somebody is like terminally sick and they now can't travel, which we've had happen before.
Mhm.
Things like that is, within the immediate family or something like that. It's a case-by-case basis that I think most vendors kind of approach in that way. You have to have a heart with things like that. And even if it isn't written into your policy, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so our point in that being that we would hope that the vendors would accommodate the client anyway, and that there would not be any additional fees. But in the event that there were, that more than likely it would be covered by the policy, but it would just be a matter of checking the policy to make sure that were the case.
So what does the application look like? I'm going to share my screen here. I have Wedsure. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then while you're talking about that, there's an area here. I'm going to share screen here. Let's see. I don't know if you can see it. Hopefully you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes.
Oh, sweet. Cool. So let's talk about, this is the website where one of the examples that you mentioned, Wedsure, it's the original wedding insurance. It says $125. If they can go to this website and get a quote, they can easily get a quote here, right?
Yeah, scroll down to the bottom.
You want me to go back? Okay.
Yeah, because I think that's where, keep going down to the bottom.
Okay.
Okay, so see where there's the wedding cancellation and postponement policy, and then there's the wedding liability. So the one you were just clicking on was liability. But if you if you click on the cancellation, I believe that the liability policy is at the top of that. So maybe click the cancellation policy, because that's going to be the one to the right.
Yeah. So basically, there's a wedding liability insurance and there's a wedding cancellation and postponement insurance. Those are two separate coverages.
Yeah.
Okay. And you recommend getting both?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So the liability one is the one we were talking about earlier. That's you can see what it says there. It's going to cover damages. It's going to be proof of insurance for a venue if they were requiring that. Alcohol coverage if you were serving alcohol, let's say at your home, things like that. That's going to be in the liability.
Got it. Now here, this is just an example here. So event type. So oh man, they offer all kinds of event insurance. Yeah. Okay, so wedding flower.
Just weddings, any type of event you should have.
Yeah. So I'm just going to choose wedding, rehearsal, dinner, ceremony, reception. So liability. So you get 1 million, 2 million. Don't know what this means, but if you click here, it gives you some description what covers. A Cliff Notes version provides a certificate of liability that most event locations require. So this is the one you're talking about, possibly for the old Exchange building. This is what they would require for.
Correct.
$125 premium. You get $1 million to $2 million. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The next line item, that medical coverage. If someone were right under where it says liability coverage limit, the next drop down, it says medical payments coverage option.
Yep.
So you can choose up to $10,000 there. So let's say Virgil, you were hosting an event and someone was hurt there and they sued you for their medical bills. This is where you could put in a claim for their medical bills, and then you could take that cash to settle with them, as opposed to going through the whole lawsuit and then having to settle otherwise. That's up to $10,000 that could be paid towards a medical bill that resulted from an instance that happened at your event.
Got it. And then what's this property damage?
That's a deductible. So the higher the deductible on these, the lower your premium will be. With the change of heart insurance, which is the cancellation policy, you have to have a minimum of a $10,000 deductible.
Got it.
That's new. That is another new policy. So 15 months out and a minimum of $10,000 deductible. So that means that for those that aren't familiar with deductibles, that means that if you file a claim, that you're going to be at least responsible for $10,000. So you
Yes.
may recoup 90,000 of the 100,000, but you'll be responsible for $10,000 if there was a change or whatever. So.
Got it. Hang on, my phone's ringing. Thing. Okay. So basically, all right, you're having a sparkler exit for your send off, and you're at your mother's home, and a home catches on fire. This is what's going to cover it, right? Property damage. Is that right?
No, that's the deductible that you would pay. So if it exceeds $10,000,
Then the insurance will cover it.
yeah, but you're gonna be paying the first $10,000. Now, if you lower that to $1,000 deductible, you're gonna see the price of the premium, and I think you're under the liability policy quote. So but you're gonna see the price of the premium more than likely go up.
So right now went up to $242 from $150.
Yeah.
So if we reduce this to 1,000 to 1,000, update coverage, then it's at $125 again.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. So basically, the higher the deductible, the lower your premium,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
Perfect. What about medical payments?
That's what we were talking about earlier. So medical payments would be,
Okay.
you chose $1,000 there. So that would be what you could get up to $1,000 if there were an instance that happened where you were sued for a medical bill.
Right.
Or it resulted in you having to have a medical bill, then you would get up to $1,000 for that coverage to pay those medical bills.
Wait, it's not updating for me. My internet is slow. Hang on. I think it's confused. You see that? It's like this wheel.
Doing the spinny wheel of death.
Yeah. So what about while this thing is waiting, talk to us about loss of deposits and all these other things.
So that should be a menu that opens up too.
Mm-hmm.
Be able to change that based on the limit there. So it really depends on the cost of your event.
Got it. So basically, they can go to this website and get a quote, and they can have all kinds of coverage, photographs and video. I did some research on this too. Basically, this pays to retake photographs or video recording if the photographer or videographer fails to appear. This appears after the event with your pictures, or the pictures are lost, damaged, or stolen. I mean, this is something that they can get as well as part of the policy.
Mm-hmm.
Some people opt not to add in the special attire, but Jacqueline, you should tell the story as to why that's important too.
I definitely think that's important because I had a bride who she and her groom actually they were having custom made. They had bought a suit and a dress, and then they were having it tailored and customized per what they wanted to change to it.
How much was it?
Taylor actually his place burnt down. The entire place. So everything in there, including his suit, her dress, burnt down. This was maybe 3 weeks before the event. So, she had to rush and get another dress, but she did have that special attire. So she was able to recoup that money and put it towards her new dress that she got. So, though that's not what you want, that's the last thing you want. It is important. It's something to think too. A lot of our brides here in Charleston travel to Charleston, and should you be traveling with your dress and it get lost, in travel, while in the airlines and things, that's something it would cover. Again, it's going to be not that it's not going to be traumatic. It will be traumatic, but at least the cost would be covered in a scenario, either of those scenarios.
Got it. That's a good idea. So while you were talking there, I'm just filling out some things here. Special attire. Let's say for that scenario, Jacqueline, how much should I put here?
I mean, you should put the cost of your dress and what it would cost to replace that. Same thing, or cost of your dress and the guy's tux or suit.
Is 5,000? I don't know the cost of dresses these days, the average, but is 5,000, 1,000, or what would you do?
I would say that's,
middle. That's kind of road. Middle road. There, 5,000 is a good start. Yeah.
What about deductible? You think 1,000 or more, or?
It's going to be what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Paying there. I mean.
Okay. And then jewelry or gifts. What do you think about these?
You haven't added the cancellation and postponement yet. So that's what it is. So, the coverage limit, expenses incurred when your event must be canceled. So usually on the other application, I think the cancellation one is a little bit more straightforward with that, because you put in the cost of your event and then it kind of helps guide you. But
let's say we put 100,000.
Yeah, see if it'll let you put in the 100,000 there. I don't know that. There
was a note there. Okay, now here's the disclaimer. Coronavirus not covered. It's you can't get a policy because of COVID-19, but other instances like hurricanes, they didn't mention that. So the deductible, let's do a $10,000 deductible for a $100,000 event. So the premium goes up to $825. It's still pretty reasonable, in my opinion, with medical payments, cancellation, and liability insurance.
Because what you've done there too, when you're adding all these additional things, so you have up to $100,000 in coverage, then you have $25,000 in additional expenses, is what you put in there. So you really up to $125,000. And then you've also been entering in on all these individual limitations for photograph, video, whatnot. So
that was my question. So if you're doing a cancellation postponement coverage, do you need loss of deposits, photographs, video, special attire?
You do, because like I said, with the incidents of the fire, that wasn't because of a cancellation or postponement. That was because of an accident. Which would be the same thing, like if the airline lost your dress or your photographer lost the film for your photography.
Got it. What about loss of deposits?
Loss of deposits can also go into, it depends on the policy, but a lot of times that can go into if a vendor has gone out of business and you lost your deposit because of that. I have had that happen before, where a client had booked a transportation company and that transportation company went out of business just out of the blue. And so, but again, she had this coverage and was able just to make the claim, get the money, and book a new vendor.
So this could go up to, that's a very important thing for me, at least. Because you never know what happens, you can pursue them through the courts and small claims court, but it's going to take you forever to get the money, back. Which leads me to my next question. Like, when you file a claim, how soon will you get your check?
I've had some people be funded within 3 days.
No way, really? That's awesome. So this one, enter a value less than or equal to 25,000. So it tells you here what they are willing to cover.
Right. Well, because you have to think about that. Like, what is the likelihood of you losing $25,000 worth of deposits because somebody's going to go out of business? Now, under cancellation and postponement, sure. Like, if you had to cancel because of a hurricane and you may lose those deposits if your vendors are not willing to travel with you, then maybe 25,000, but I haven't ever seen that.
Yeah.
I've never seen $25,000 loss. So
Yeah.
if you want
I
to see
mean,
your premium come down a little there, I think that you could. I think that if you want extra protection because of COVID-19, and you're worried that, you know, you would put down $25,000 worth of deposits and that many people would go out of business, I certainly don't hope that for the,
Yeah.
I wish that for the wedding industry, but you know, maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, I've seen this was probably almost 10 years ago when a venue all of a sudden, after booking 30 or so weddings,
I remember that happening.
goes down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember that? So I'm sure a venue, I don't know what their deposits requirements are like. So I'm sure it's a couple of $1,000s. So that
Right.
would be covered under this.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. But I mean, and that has happened, you know, too. That's something to think about, especially for like rehearsal dinners, with, you know, the restaurant industry and kind of where they are right now. We hope they're going to, you know, have a resurgence and like come back and with full force, and we want that. But it's going to be a hard road for them. So especially for rehearsal dinners, I don't think that's a bad thing to think about because it could happen.
Now, so is this just for weddings, and then do you get a separate policy for rehearsal dinner then?
It depends on the policy. Sometimes you can, when you go back to the first page, if you look at the bottom, there is a policy that includes them all.
Got it. And I'm sure as you go through this application process, you will put down the date, location, and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So these are just basically quotes. Okay. What about
if it's a different host,
right?
The rehearsal dinner and the wedding are a different host. You know, and let's say a hurricane did come through and you want to recoup that cost, but you only put in $100,000 and you weren't thinking about the cost of the rehearsal dinner. If you max out that policy just for the wedding, you're not going to get that money back necessarily for the rehearsal dinner. I mean, you know, I would take out 2 different policies per event. If you look down at the very bottom too, something that I think is really helpful, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, you see where it says view sample policy. That's a good resource for people because they can see the fine print. And this is what we're used to seeing. I mean, it's very long, but it's going to define things that would be exclusions. And it's also going to give you definitions of what they mean.
Yeah. Wow.
So this is.
Yeah. So there's a lot of definitions here that kind of clarify a lot of things.
Yeah.
Gosh, this is so important. I recommend this. I mean, so much. This is so important.
We do too, and that's why we believe strongly in including it in our contract, and it's something that we've always preached to our clients, and really too to some of our friends and other vendors, just because we have seen how much of a stress reliever it's been, even during all of the moves from COVID-19. I mean, we moved now 16 events, 16 or 17 events now, and majority of them did already have their policy in place. And I can tell you it was a much smoother process moving that because they knew, okay, even though I'm being charged or I'm losing some money on some invitations or I'm losing money on this, but I'm going to submit it, I'm going to be able to recoup that couple $1,000. And that made the process so much, it was already so hurtful to have to move.
Yeah.
But knowing that they were able to financially recover from it, it really made the process a little bit easier on them.
Yeah, because all they have to do is make a decision. Everything is going to be taken care of. All they have to do is all right, we're going to make a decision to move the date. And when you're having to make a decision and then at the same time worried about cost and future cost if you were to move it, that's hard. That's very difficult.
Yeah.
And not to mention that you've been planning this day and, you know, for a long time, for over a year or 9 months, you know, this just alleviates a lot of the variables. Man,
Well,
that's already heartbreaking.
A lot of our planner friends, when they have an extreme scenario going on and they say, oh, guys, I had so-and-so, this happened. What do I do because they're not going to be covered? My first question to them always is, do they have an insurance policy? And, sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. But there are so many one-offs. Like, even look at this. Okay, professional counseling.
Right.
The bride is, let's say that she is so distraught because of having to cancel her wedding, and she has to go and seek therapy. It's not covered by her normal health insurance. So, an average therapist session, can be $100, $150 per session.
Mm.
That is something that they are able to even get coverage for. They would even be able to get reimbursed because of having a situation that caused them to need to go and get professional counseling.
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw that, but I just the deductible, let's say, is $250 at $5,000 coverage. I mean, that only increased the premium by $20 or less change. So with this cancellation part here, what's the difference between this? Looks like I clicked on the liability insurance, but there's a wedding cancellation here too. So what does this mean right here?
This is the same application. What you were doing on the other, you're able to add each individual thing. So if you only want a liability policy that simply has $1 million to $2 million limitation, that just is something that you can prove to your venue that you're carrying that liability policy,
right,
then it can be as low as $125. But when you start adding in cancellation and everything, and it'll come to you, the final version will come to you in 2 different documents. One that'll be cancellation. These are the same quotes.
Yeah.
You're just adding in.
Adding
in the individual categories. So when you add in cancellation and postponement, you're going to get a premium quote because you're going to pay for both of them at the same time to the same company, but you're going to get 2 separate policies, one that says liability and one that says cancellation postponement.
Got it. Okay. Now,
so if you proceeded with this right now, and let's say go ahead and add medical payments just to be safe, like go ahead and add like $2,500 or something there.
This is the deductible, or what is this?
No, that's remember, that's the payments, the medical payments.
Got it.
So update your coverage, click update coverage there.
Okay.
All right. So with the addition of medical payments and $1,000 damage deductible, property damage deductible. So if somebody damaged said venue, if you just wanted that and you didn't want any of the coverage for the other things, cancellation or damage to specific things, attire, photographs, rented items, any of those things, just that liability, then your policy would be $200.65.
Right. What do you recommend here? Medical payments and property damage. What would you say?
That's going to be a personal decision as to what people are going to feel comfortable, whether they're comfortable what they would want to do if they were sued. If you were sued and someone said, hey, I've racked up $5,000 in medical bills, I expect you, Virgil, to pay for them. You can go to court with me, or you can pay me the $5,000, or I'm going to sue you. Ultimately, you're going to end up having to pay for an attorney, and we're going to have to go and do depositions, and we're going to have to go and, sit and try and settle it. Yeah. I mean, we can go to small claims court. That's going to end up costing you more money anyway, or you could have up to $10,000 of coverage. And what that means is then, okay, I'm going to put in a claim with my insurance for the event policy, and then I'm going to be able to get that $5,000 in cash to then pay said person's medical bills and settle and not go to court. Right.
Got it. So I just put 10,000. I don't know why, but I feel like I went in and put 10,000 just to see the coverage. As far as premium, it went from 125 to 250, that's still not too bad.
No, I mean,
What about cancellation and postponement? What would you put here?
So that's going to be the cost. I mean, you can click on the little question mark, but usually that's the cost of your event. Case or expenses incurred when your event must be canceled or postponed. Yeah. I mean, I would put an estimated, you know, if your wedding, your budget's 100,000, I would.
Okay, so they're saying you can only do 100,000 or less. Let's say I'm gonna put 95. So, and then this one, deductible, 5,000, update coverage. So that took that took us 700. Excuse me.
But if you go back to the edit there, I want you to make sure you saw what happened. So when you entered in 95,000, your additional expenses coverage limit jumped up to 23,750. So you're covered for 95,000, but there's also an additional expenses line item. Yeah.
What does that mean?
So it pays when an expense is incurred to prevent a cancellation, which would have been covered under cancellation and postponement.
What's an example of that? Like,
I would have to look in the exceptions.
that's something that they would need to ask if they want clarification on that, right?
Yeah, and it would be covered, you know, in that policy. You would have line items that are going to define exactly what that is. Before you sign off on it, you are able to read all of that to make sure that is what you want it to be, or you understand what that is.
Yeah.
Got it. Loss of deposits, would you put something here?
Yes.
I think the max was 25,000 based on what we had earlier. All right. Photographs, video, what would you put?
Well, you know, this is in the event that they were lost or damaged, or so maybe, you know, maybe you could speak to that. I mean, if the actual files and whatnot were lost and damaged and nothing for that day. I mean, if it was a loss of the photographer's services, under cancellation and postponement. I mean, you know, under that 95,000. But this is for the actual tangible deliverables that you give.
I mean, yeah. I mean, let's just put 5,000. Okay. Special attire, highly recommended. What was the limit here? I think, let's say we put 5,000 on there. So that brings us there. What about jewelry and gifts? Do you think these are necessary, or these are like one of those insurance upsell strategies to sell you more insurance?
It depends. Well, not necessarily. I mean, if on the day of someone misplaced your wedding band, or you know, there was some sort of damage to it, there are a lot of brides that, because if the groom has purchased that wedding ring, I can speak to personal for this. I mean, I've not had any damage to mine, but I know my husband certainly didn't think to ever add my ring to his insurance policy, because at that time we still had, before we were married, everything was still separate for us. Like, we didn't have a homeowner's policy. A lot of times people will add jewelry to their homeowner's policy.
Right.
You have to then go in and take a you have to turn in your, what's the word I'm looking for? The appraisal.
Yeah.
And whatnot. And so if you don't have any sort of coverage on that, then yeah, it's probably a great idea to have that in there, because it's limited to only the wedding day though. So, I mean, you would have damage or loss on the wedding day, but
hopefully by the time you have jewelry, that you already have your jewelry insured. So this may or may not be necessary.
But if the best man was the one that was responsible for bringing the wedding bands and he lost them, or they fell out of his pocket, okay? Let's say that. Then the cost of the wedding bands, I mean, depending on what they are, but let's say the bride's may be like 1,200, 1,000, 12. If it's a diamond band, maybe. Maybe more, depending on what type it is. I'm talking like a thin little wedding band.
Yeah.
Grooms can go anywhere from, I'd say 400 and up.
So what do you think? Wedding band 1,200, and then another wedding band 1,200, or is that?
I'd maybe say 1,000. I mean, it depends on the groom's preference. I don't think my husband's was. I think I paid like $500 or $600. I mean, granted, that was like 8 years ago, but
it depends all on the cost of gold and things like that.
Yeah.
Time.
All right. So I just put 1,700 there, just a wedding band, just an example. So these obviously, this one, rented party supplies, this coverage pays to repair or replace rented items. Is this necessary?
I mean, each rental company that we have does have a damage
waiver that you pay anyway. Yeah.
So not necessarily do you need that, because they already have that. However, should something exceed what is covered in the damage waiver, it could do that, but that's very much, so it's kind of a very rare one-off.
Yeah. What about professional counseling? Is this something that you see out there that is needed?
I think that's a case by case. I mean, there are some people that don't feel comfortable going to a therapist. If you're that type of person, then don't put this in there, because that's just additional coverage that you wouldn't use. That's really to be for someone that, you would experience trauma from an instance, and then it would require you to go and have professional counseling.
Got it.
So
right now, this is like an example of get an instant quote, 857. This is probably not 100% accurate, but do you think this would be a nice depiction of, a liability and hurricane, storm, whatever happens kind of insurance, wedding insurance?
I think so. I will say that price is slightly higher than we were seeing last year. Probably the same policy last year, we maybe could have gotten for more like $550 to $600.
Yeah.
I think it's just a sign of the times, because these insurance companies are just being maxed out. They're being, a lot of claims have had to be submitted because of COVID-19. So that's why we're seeing an increase in the premiums. I don't think that we'll see these policies exceed $1,000 as of right now. But even if they are, if you are spending $100,000 to $125,000 on your wedding, plus, $857 in the scheme of things, it is so worth it. It's just like, if you buy a house that cost $350,000, why would you have homeowners insurance, and we don't think that our house is going to burn down today, but what if it did? It's just, you want to make sure that you're protected.
That's a very good point. So do you think when they postpone the wedding, they will immediately get the check with this cancellation policy of $95,000 or whatever applies, or they're still obviously probably going to ask for documentations, right? Like, just like you said earlier, like what they want to see, contracts and things like that.
How much they're asking for. Like, if they're asking for $50,000 in damages and whatnot, and there's going to be an adjuster that's really going to look into that and make sure that all of those items really are covered. And so it may take a little longer for you to be funded. Now, if you submit a claim that was around $3,000 or so, and that was to cover, I've had to move my event, so I incurred a fee. Well, I've already paid for the invitations, I've already paid for printed materials, and now I can't use those things because they have the wrong date, and everyone else is moving, but this is what I'm having to submit. Then sure, you'll probably be funded within a week or so. They may be more backed up now because of COVID-19 claims. They may have gotten through some of it at this point. So it's going to depend on company to company. So if a major hurricane is going on and you have a lot of people filing claims, then it might take longer than that. But I can tell just from the experience from this past spring, I saw a lot of people that were funded within a week, and it was very quick, and it was a relatively smooth process for everybody.
Yeah. Wow. This is great. This is so great. This is such informative podcast, knowing that for under $1,000, you can get insured for any postponement or cancellation. That's so awesome. Thank you so much for providing this insight. But definitely, if you're listening out there, please, please, please do your due diligence. Contact WedSure, contact Merkel Travelers, and WedSafe. These are the insurance companies that we would have talked about in this podcast. Do your research. This is not a professional advice. This is something that we are just really talking about. It's an opinion piece. You definitely need to do your research and do what applies to you. Thank you so much for joining us. You guys are awesome. Tell me what's next for y'all.
For us, we're just getting, right now we have a couple of events that are taking place in July and August, and, our fall events. So as venues are opening back up here, and we're just trying to kind of prepare ourselves and our clients for the changes that are to come and how to address those changes. And, there's adjustments to floor plans and things like that we have to make. And so we're just kind of preparing for what's next. And
and just kind of navigating how to manage the guest expectations going forward through this event season, especially this summer. It's going to be a different guest experience for people, I think. We're still seeing some restrictions on events. So we're just stepping outside of the box and having to get creative on ways that we can adapt and make sure that it's still a really pleasant experience for everyone. And I know we've got some coming up with you too, Virgil. So
yeah,
we'll see it in action. We will see. But
excited. I'm excited about that. I'm really looking forward to it. So one more question about this wedding insurance. Are you seeing maybe in the foreseeable future that this will be one of those things that's highly recommended or even required as wedding planners or venues?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I think we're seeing a lot of people revisit their contracts, ourselves included. It was already in ours, but I think that you're going to see it become a lot more commonplace. And I don't know that you'll see venues all requiring cancellation, but I think you're going to see a lot of planners requiring it, just because of some of the things some of the other players have had to navigate due to cancellations and moving and whatnot. And two, really, photographers and other people's, like you mentioned, we're all small businesses. Losing these deposits for us is detrimental. I mean, it's very hard for us to be able to make bills, be able to make payroll, all of those things. We've seen that this past spring. We've seen what that's done. So having this policy in place that is going to protect the client ultimately ends up protecting all of us, because then it doesn't become an argument, because the client then makes sure that they are covered. And I think that most people are reasonable and they understand what a non-refundable deposit is and knows that we in good faith have held those dates. But when it comes to losing out on that money in a time like this, that's a hard thing to hear. And some people aren't as understanding, because that is detrimental to them, because they may have lost their job, or they may have, they may need that money back. So I see both sides of it, but having the policy in place protects everyone. So why not do it when you're going to be spending that amount of money,
Yeah, I 100% agree. Thank you so much for getting this conversation started. I don't know of any other conversations that's going on out there around the country as far as wedding insurance, but I think it's definitely one that needs to be out there more. And as I talk to a lot of brides that I'm working with, I do ask them, it's part of my questionnaire, if they do have wedding insurance, and a lot of them they don't have it. So I just kind of like, ooh, man, you know, uh, as I get older, I'm always thinking about what could happen. And as we, you know, deal with these situations that we've dealt with in the past, I'm going on my 16th season. I've seen it all, just like you guys, tornado and hurricane and flooding. And it is just mind boggling to just really think about what could happen. It definitely brings a lot of peace, I think, to all the parties involved, the families, and then the vendors, knowing that, okay, we don't have to deal with it as bad as we are going to if they didn't have insurance. So I'm so glad that you guys were part of the conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you?
You can find us on our website, sweetgrasssocial.com. You can find us on Instagram at sweetgrasssocial. We welcome you to email us if you have any questions or anything about our services, or even, you know, pertaining to wedding insurance. Like we said, we're not brokers by any means. We do not get any sort of kickback or anything from asking people to have wedding insurance. We just think that it's a really great protection, and we can just tell you our own personal experiences. But we welcome, you know, any questions, and especially to any other vendors that want to know how important it is to ask your clients to have these policies. We welcome any of those conversations too. Jacqueline and I are a big believer on making sure that we have a very strong event partner network. I mean, we love the Charleston vendors, I mean, even beyond Charleston as well. And we want to help each other out. We've always felt that that's the best way to move forward in business, is to help one another out. So if there are any questions about that, about our contract, any of those things, we welcome that, and we are happy to discuss it with any of our peers in the industry as well. So I think community is what makes us all more successful ultimately. So
that's awesome. Thank you so much. The last thing I want to ask you is, what advice, and I know we talked about it throughout this whole show, if a bride is listening right now, what advice would you give her about wedding insurance?
Get it. No, I mean, the biggest advice is that you need it. Look into it, ask a lot of questions so that you're getting the coverage that you know that you need. And you're not spending on things that maybe you don't need, but you know, definitely start researching, start looking into it, ask the questions, and get it sooner rather than later.
And if you don't understand your contracts and understand the losses that you may incur if there was an event that caused you to cancel or postpone, if you want to roll the dice, that is totally your prerogative. Just understand what you're getting yourself into, and then what potential losses that you may have. If you're okay with that, and you're okay with that number, that is great. But just make sure you understand your contracts and the potential of lost deposits or lost full fees as well.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And then, do you have any advice for other wedding planners and vendors out there as far as encouraging wedding insurance with their own clients?
Yeah, I mean, I encourage, especially planners, every planner to put it in their contract that it's required. You know, I think and if you don't know about it, to start your own research and to, you know, open that door and start looking into it and understand for your own knowledge as well why it's so important for your clients to have that. You know, other vendors outside of that, you know, I don't think it's a bad thing for you to put it in your contracts either. It just protects everybody. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it starts with the planner. I mean, I think because the planner is before we book any of the other event partners, the planner can then say, you know, it's so important for this reason, and then so it doesn't take having to have, you know, everyone else, the photographer, the videographer, the florist, everyone else having to put that in their contracts as well. So it's really important to the planning community that we addressed it. Now, if a client didn't have a planner, then, you know, that's a different story, but but it starts with the planner, because we're the ones, our role is to guide our clients through this process and to anticipate the unknowns and to anticipate the possibilities based on our experience. And so I think that I think it starts with the planning community. So if you have a planner, ask them the question, ask them if they think that it's important. Everyone's opinion may vary. As far as our company, we will tell you 100% of the time, yes, purchase it.
What if they don't have a planner? What if they're in the middle of nowhere, or they're somewhere in the industry, in a city where planners are not really not the same here in Charleston?
Yeah, that's okay. These policies are going to still apply to you if you're within the US. Some of them even outside of the US. So do the same research, still purchase a policy. Make sure that you're covered. You don't want to be in a situation if you don't have a planner that's helping you navigate cancellation and postponement. That's stressful enough as it is. I mean, we move about 10 vendor contracts or so when we do a cancellation. I mean, and that's just an average. Like, we could have 15. So it's a lot of moving parts and a lot of negotiation. So it's going to be a lot of work on you anyways if you had to postpone or cancel. So this is going to be something that is going to be a real saving grace for you. It's really important to consider it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel.
Guys, if you're listening, if you made it this far, this podcast will be on our YouTube channel under Conversations Over Sweet Tea. It will also be on iTunes. And if you are wanting to see, I shared my screen during the podcast when I was asking them about going through getting an instant quote. If you want to see that, you have to watch the YouTube channel to see what we went through. But if you're driving the car, you can listen to this obviously on iTunes. But thank you so much, Meredith and Jacqueline, for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.